Best not be going in that forest. There's an urban legend that folk go missing in there. Lately, there seems to be some truth to that rumor. Why, just last week we had 5 people go in there that were never seen again. Hello, and welcome to Tuna's Tales. This time on Pondering Monsters, we'll be covering Hook Hoarders from the Monster Manual for D&D 5e. This large creature is a CR3 monstrosity that is normally native to cave systems. However, this encounter is in a forest rather than underground. This means that we get to ask some interesting questions about how a creature suited for one environment manages to survive in another. Spoiler alert, these Hook Hoarders are thriving in these woods. So, if you're curious what this means for your party, then stick around as we get into it. We find our heroes sitting around a tavern one night, taking in the culture and swapping tales of their adventures with the townsfolk. As the evening winds down and the shadows cast from the fire grow long, talk eventually turns to what the local ghost stories may be. The room falls silent as the townsfolk all give each other a concerned look. One of our heroes speaks up, asking, "What's wrong?" And from the shadows of the bar, the tavern keeper starts in on a story. Legend has it that a young couple went for a walk in the woods one day and got lost as the sun went down. They found a fairly well-hidden cave to stay the night in, but they kept hearing odd sounds from outside. The scraping of stones, the clacking of bones, and something being bashed against the trees. Their curiosity got the better of them, and they risked a look outside. After that, they were never seen again. The room is quiet for a moment after the tavern keeper finishes. One of our heroes breaks the silence with their laughter. They compliment the townsfolk on being good storytellers, but inform them that there are inconsistencies to their tale. Their laughter is met with stony faces, as the townsfolk tell them that, despite the inconsistencies, people have been going missing in the woods recently, and that the townsfolk are starting to get scared. Realizing the weight of the situation, our heroes apologize and offer to look into these disappearances in the morning. The townsfolk seem to cheer up at this offer and thank them profusely before everyone retires for the night. Come morning, the adventurers gather their gear and set off into the woods for a day of investigation.
Oh no, I hope that the couple from the story's alright. They are alright, aren't they?
Not quite, Red.
Wait, if they're not okay, then how did people know what the couple heard?
Seems you've spotted one of those inconsistencies that our heroes called out. Like most urban legends, there's usually something that just doesn't add up if you dig deeper into it. Why should something the locals in a fantasy world tell around a campfire be any different?
I guess that makes sense, but why have inconsistencies at all?
Well, hopefully it'll pique your party's interest. You can't tell me that if you're an adventurer and came across a real-life occurrence of something like, man-door hand hook car door, that you wouldn't want to look into it.
Wait a minute.
Yes, Red?
Tuna, is this encounter all just a joke?
It can be if you want. You can play it straight easy enough, but when I looked at the Hook Hoarder, I just knew that it was ripe for a little goof to spring on your players.
You're not wrong. So, how do we drop that line then?
Let's see, you could put a mad hermit that speaks Hook Hoarder, yes, they have their own language, in the forest for the party to discover. Or they can find the cave from the story and the walls inside are all covered with that phrase.
Except there aren't usually cars in a fantasy world, so how does this even work?
Well, I'd recommend changing it to something like Man Cave Hand, Hook Cave Horror. The goal is to keep it similar enough that your players will recognize it, get a little info about what's in the woods here, and hopefully roll their eyes before they roll their dice.
So, other than the memes, what's the point of this encounter?
I think this works well as a means to add some local flavor to your world, to show off some world building that you've done, or just as a little filler to give the party some gold.
What if the party's high level, though?
In that case, I guess you could go with something like the party needs something from this town/forest, and the Hook Horrors are in the way now.
Ooh, I can work with that. But what are they doing in the forest? Don't they normally live in caves?
Normally they do. I'll be leaving the reason why they aren't up to you, as there are many different answers to how they got to where they are, and none of them are going to be wrong. However, them being in the forest does raise some interesting points.
Like what?
Well, normally in the real world, when a creature that isn't native to an environment gets introduced to one that they are also well suited for, bad things tend to happen.
Oh, like an invasive species?
Exactly. Add in some adaptations that they may have developed, and you can throw even the most veteran of players for a loop.
What kind of adaptations?
I'll go into more detail on that in a minute here, but I think what I have in mind will make for an interesting encounter. For now, though, what's your next question?
Okay. So, just what is the party expected to do here?
I'd say either find the missing people or the creatures responsible. Of course, doing one should also take care of the other.
And they just look for and follow the signs?
More or less, except with skill challenges along the way. You can call for survival or nature checks to look for anything out of the ordinary, like gashes in trees, signs of people, etc. You can also use their passive perception or call for perception checks to let them know if they hear anything. After enough successes, I'm thinking at least 3, they can reach the cave from the legend told by the townsfolk.
Are the hook horrors in the cave?
Not necessarily, but they should be nearby enough that when the party finds the cave, they get attacked by the creatures.
Okay, so then there's combat, and if the party survives, they've saved the day?
Yep, pretty straightforward for this one.
I'll say. I can't help but think you've got something up your sleeve, though.
You know, you wouldn't be wrong with that. If you're ready to see what it might be, then how about we start tying this all together?
Okay.
When it comes to this whole encounter, things really are fairly straightforward. Your party hears about some missing people and offers to help the town. They find the people, or their remains, and deal with the source of the legend. This gives us 3 distinct parts to work with. The first one we're going to be looking at is the party hears about a problem. This can of course be done however you think is best, but I'll be going with the urban legend approach. Ideally, whatever version of the urban legend you provide to your party, it should give them some info about what they're getting into. Even with inconsistencies in the story, there should be some truth to it. After listening to the locals tell their urban legend, a detail from it sticks in your mind. You could have sworn that you've heard about a creature that could be the source of the legend, but you can't quite place what it might be. For my legend, the info comes from the sounds that the couple in the story heard. These are the types of sounds mentioned in the hook horror flavor about how their language works. If you have someone in your party that knows about monstrosities or Underdark style caves, then let them roll to see if they can figure out the type of creature. Whatever check you call for, a DC of at least 16 to 18 seems reasonable for trying to figure out the creature from a description of a sound. Of course, you can change the legend however you want. Do you want to say that people went looking for them and found hook claw marks? How about the couple survives and sees a leftover hook horror hand? Next up is the party finding the missing people. You can get dark with this and say that they aren't alive anymore. Or you can say that they're trapped in a cave, maybe the one from the legend. The party can track them down just by doing some normal searching in the woods for either the people or the creature. Whatever skill feels appropriate for how a character wants to search is good here. Just make the check somewhere around a DC 14 for a 5th level party. When they find the cave, this is where you can drop the man cave hand, hook cave horror line, if you want to go with that. As you move through the woods, you see a cave just beyond some trees, not much further ahead. You start to make your way inside, and you get the feeling that this might be the cave from the legend. The light from your torch is cast across the walls, and that's when you see that every inch of this cave is covered with the phrase, man cave hand, hook cave horror. All that's left now is dealing with the source of the legend, and oh boy are they in for it. Of course, we know that this is going to be a hook horror, and maybe your party does too at this point. But if you look at the hook horror stats, they're kind of bland. They aren't poorly designed creatures, but under a microscope, they don't seem like much more than a bag of hit points. If we want them to be front and center to this encounter, then we're going to need to modify them a little bit. There's a rustling in the branches overhead. You turn around just in time to see a large, bird-beaked creature with an insectoid-like exoskeleton and arms that end in large hooked claws come swinging out of the trees. As it lands nearby, it proceeds to swipe at you before it launches back up into the canopy. Enter the arboreal hook horror, a new variation of this creature that has adapted to the forest and is thriving. They have no natural predators, plenty of food, and a unique skill set that isn't too hard to translate to this new environment. As a result, they've also gained a couple new features that make them even better suited for the forest. The first of these is a +2 stealth proficiency. Their dex mod is +0 and proficiency bonus is +2. This seems reasonable for a large creature that moves about the trees. When it comes to movement though, let's give them a fly speed.
Who hurt you, Tuna?
Bear with me, I'm not saying they should suddenly sprout wings, but rather that their hook hands are well suited for swinging from the branches. You can even balance this a little by saying that they only have this fly speed while surrounded by trees. I suggest we start with 30 feet of flying, however, if you want to apply a fairly loose interpretation of the long jump rule, then we can bump that up to a 40 or 50 foot speed. Now, when I say loose interpretation, I really mean it here. Normally movement and jumping aren't separate, but in the sake of keeping things interesting and challenging your party, I don't care. Beyond that, tacking it onto the newly found fly speed is mostly for flavor. This just leaves one new ability. You may have guessed it already, but I'm thinking flyby. Flyby stops them from provoking attacks of opportunity when they fly out of an enemy's reach. This allows them to swing in, attack, and then leave before anyone can really react to them. In my experience, characters don't usually deal with highly mobile creatures. If the same is true for your table, then this should be a good out-of-the-box combat for them. For a 5th level party, I would use only one of the Arboreal Hook Horrors, and if I was running this for a lower level party, I wouldn't make any modifications to the creature at all. But now, what about higher level parties? For that, we'll need to start scaling this up. With the modifications I suggested, I'd put the Arboreal Hook Horror closer to a CR4 creature rather than its default CR3. That being said, when it comes to scaling, you now have some options. Like, you can scale it down just by removing the added abilities. For higher level parties though, adding in more creatures is always an option. With their additional abilities, 3 or 4 would probably be about right for a 10th level party, and 4 or 5 would fit with a 15th level party. You don't need to change their health or AC, but that is an option. Otherwise, at higher levels, you may want to increase their 2-hit to help them keep up with the party. And the final bit of scaling that I can recommend here is a different monster book called The Monster Manual Expanded by Dragonix. You can find it on the DM's Guild, and it has stats for a Hook Horror Alpha and Clan Mother if you want beefier creatures. Now you know what can happen when a monster becomes an invasive species in D&D. If you're ever looking for a fun little exercise, try picking a creature and just coming up with how it would do in an environment other than its normal one. Take it a step further and ask how that environment would change it. Doing this can help keep your combats interesting and your players on their toes. If you want to try out the Arboreal Hook Horror, then you can find its stats for free over on my Patreon. If you do try it out, feel free to let me know how it goes. With that though, if you liked this encounter, then leaving a like and subscribing if you really liked it would be much appreciated. And if you have any thoughts or questions on my encounters, or suggestions for other monsters that you want to see in Encounter 4, then I'd love to see them in the comments below. For now though, thanks for letting me talk at you all, and until next time, keep pondering.